Good morning. My name is Karel Heynert. I work for Deltares. Deltares is a, you can call it, Dutch water institute. We have about 800 people. Many of them do environmental modeling, and actually I'm not one of them, but I'm still going to talk to you. I hope it doesn't disappoint you. So I will talk a bit more about how to use these kind of systems. And I called my presentation, I thought, Delta thinking, which is a bit ambitious. But in the Netherlands, there's this interesting phenomena. After we had big floods in the 50s, of the last century, there was this Delta program, a very technical program, where we built these big barriers, which we are proud of, and we show to everybody. But after that, this program changed into, let's say, got an environmental touch. And there were open barriers, and there was communication between the civil engineers and the ecologists and the socio-economic people. And actually, this became the kind of Delta thinking, which we call in the Netherlands. And now, if there's a big plan on transportation, for example, we call it the Delta Plan for Transportation, or the Delta Plan for Health, which means that people get together, do some, discuss the content, and then try to make decisions. So from the actual water part, it's now everywhere. It's like a virus. I will give you a little bit of context where I come from. So this is for me, this is a kind of archetypical Dutch situation. This is the environment we live in. And if you look at the delta and your delta and our delta, there are some similarities and there's some big differences, of course. I always like to point out that, in fact, for us, it's relatively easy to take decisions and to get together and to spend money, because many of our people, much of our economy is in the floodplain. Where did it go? What's happening? So much of our economy, about 65% of our economy is in the floodplain. Actually, flood management is not a political topic. There's decisions taken in Parliament, but it's not that it's balanced against transportation or health. So I like to paint that context. In effect, it's a bit similar than your situation. Well, America is a very different country in culture, where the delta is so important in California. It in fact affects everybody. So you would think it's not a political issue. It's normal that you take measures there to solve the problems. But I think the variety of issues that you have to deal with may be bigger. And in that context of, let's say, quite some room to do water management, our institute is present. So we focus on all kinds of water-related aspects: groundwater, rivers, coasts. It's policy. It's to a degree design, and there's a lot of modeling and the use of modeling in decision-making processes. And I will show you two examples. So why did I end up here, or why did we end up here? And there's two examples very close to your environment. One is that for a long time we have been working with the USGS. We have, I think it's about 15 years at the moment, maybe 10, 15 years. At least one person of us has been sitting in the office of the USGS, working on modeling, introducing our, these days, open source Delft 3D system. In fact, not that important, but to transfer the code. We develop code for water management, to support water management decisions, but also to support people using it and developing models to a degree, because this is an independent thing. In itself, Delft 3D you could call a system with which you could do integrated environmental modeling. But like has been said before many times, it's not only about the model. You can do it, but there's much more to it. And for example, we have been supporting the USGS also with the Cascade project, which I think will be discussed in the afternoon. So I will not talk very much about this at this stage. It's an open source system. And the other thing we did in this environment is we've been involved in the developing of the new river forecasting system. Maybe Rob Hartman will talk about it a little bit later on. And that uses Delfuse software, which is, you can say, like a process manager. So it's an IT tool which structures working processes. How do you get from data to forecasts? And that's what I find interesting about software and about, let's say, especially when you try to take it into decision in real time, that is relatively obvious that you have to, in the end, say whether there's a flood or not. You have to really be specific about how you're going to use the data, how you're going to validate it, how are you going to run the models. Because it's software, you have to be specific. And it forces people somehow to take decisions and to connect. So it's not a goal in itself, but it can help let's say, an organizational transition process in an organization, and to a degree also over various organizations, to rationalize that, to harmonize it. It won't solve the problem, but it helps to bring people on the same page for certain aspects. Okay, that's my introduction, and I will stay in the time. I want to talk to you about two cases, and these are Dutch cases. One is about international estuary management in the Western Scheldt. I will show you where it is in a minute, and then I will talk a bit about the National Water Management Plan in the Netherlands, which is called the Delta program, Delta again. But before I do that, I want to talk a bit about, what are we talking about? If we talk about community modeling, for example, in fact, for me, it's of course knowledge management. You bring together knowledge and you somehow try to let's say, understand what the system is doing, what are views of scientists on the system. It's the kind of objective information that you have about the system. And compared to politics or that's more, well, there's something at stake. It may be more subjective. And for me, modeling of, let's say, this environment is about data. It's about how do you look at the system? What are the important functions you try to address? And what are the indicators? How are you going to look at them? And then, of course, you have to somehow model them. Of course, it's normally in the other way around, in practical sense. But in fact, that may be the right order. And then you have to, well, exchange information between peer groups, between groups of with different backgrounds, scientists, but also to the outside world. So it has been said several times before. And of course, you need some software to, well, hang it all together. And in the end, the goal is to derive policies and measures that are accepted, so can be implemented. Well, that sounds good, but how to do it? I'm not going to give you an answer. I'll just give you a picture of two processes that worked in that way. So first is the Western Scheldt, which is the estuary. You see it there. The white part is in the picture on the right is Holland, and below it is Belgium. So it's an international context. And here you see it also, the harbor of Rotterdam and the harbor of Antwerp, which are both very big harbors in Europe and competing, are in that area. And the Western Scheldt is the shipping channel to Antwerp. It's about 60 miles, and it's going through quite a natural area. It's one of we've closed off everything in Holland. This is the only one we didn't close, because the Belgians didn't want us to close it. We closed it several hundred years ago for some time. And the context is if you look at society, the context is also this, that the 1953 flood in Holland changed the thinking about flood management very much. People in that area, the farmers, the population, they don't want to retreat. They don't want to give anything back to the water. Their grandparents have been in this flood, and even if they didn't, it's very much protecting in that area. And then there's the harbor of Antwerp. It's very big. It's getting bigger all the time, and the ships have to come in. And then there's of course the environment, because it's a protected area. And but that is that's most difficult to quantify. The other two are very much quantifiable. Civil engineers can do that, but the rest is like me. But the other aspect, environment, is also very important. Now, one of the let's say the things that one was the long-term vision development. How should you develop that area, which is let's say triggered by the deepening. The deepening is the driving factor for the discussions. I should say, I said the Belgians, I maybe jokingly said, we have closed the harbor. We have actually in 1585, we've closed their harbor for 200 years. And you would think that's a long time ago, but it's still in the cultural memory. and if we restrict, let's say, the dredging, it comes up again. Okay. So the long-term vision, and there's many rounds. I will just show you one. The second round of discussions about the deepening was at the end of the 90s. It took about 25 years to come to a decision. It started off with political discussions, and of course there were scientists involved, and at a certain point, but it took a very long time. And then in 2005. There was another round, and knowing it's not so long after the first one. So in that case, what actually happened was that the scientists and the engineers from both countries started to work together first, and they started to think about what is the morphology of the estuary, how does it affect the ecology, doing some modeling, not necessarily one model, but do it side by side, but do it as a team. So more or less. Let's say, agree with the different scientists in both countries about what is the right thing to do. And then it went actually very smooth in this political project. But that is a long-term vision, and in 5 years' time, there's more elements into it. But the deepening would be to 45 feet, and there would be 3,000 hectares of land be given back to the estuary to compensate some of the deepening effects for nature, especially. Okay, that's good. I will do this example, and maybe I'll skip the other one. And then, of course, it comes to implementation, and then you're back on the ground, because here we talk about this big estuary, but then an individual polder, they have to take away the levees. And this area is called the Hedwige Polder. Which is very close to nuclear plants and also to a natural area, and only a few people live there. But then again, implementation becomes a political problem. And what can models do there? Actually, very little. But it's an important step. You make a plan, you want to implement it. So it's very political. The parliament in Holland said, well, we're not going to give up the land for the Belgians, for the deepening of the river. In fact, the discussion was very much about, in the end, you had a context that there was this long-term vision. In that context, something had to happen. So in the end, there was, of course, a relatively legal discussion about what are the indicators. Are the indicators actually, let's say, proving an advantage or not? So it was a semi-legal discussion. In the end, it went through, but it took 8 years to get through. But it's important that to be specific about why is a plan actually giving an advantage? Why is an alternative measure not better? Because our goal is, in fact, to have these visions implemented. Okay, I will skip this one, and I will go to the last one. Yeah. So I want to return back to this slide, and I modified it a little bit. So we have been talking about this objective information, and about before talking about building communities or building communities for modeling. And I'm not saying that this is truth, but I would think that if you look at this process, and also as a national water plan in the Netherlands, and I think it must be similar in your environment, there are a number of aspects where you should reach uniformity in this whole modeling context, which is about the data, for example, the depths, the habitats. That should be objective and agreed within a community. Also about the functions and indicators. If you think about a plan, then you need to know what's it for? How are you going to look at information? And be very specific. This is really something that should be developed in a community. And also the information management. How are you going to communicate? How are you going to do that? And how are you going to keep everybody on the same page and understand what's actually the decision and what are the consequences? I think here you talk about uniformity. You have to agree about that too, largely. And variety, actually it doesn't matter exactly which models you use. It will be helpful, and maybe you win a prize if you do it right. But if it's not easy, you can also use models side by side. Even for ecology, for example, I think it's very, very good to use models side by side because they reflect visions on how an ecological system is developing. But you need to be clear how you use them. How you use them side by side. The information management needs to be clear. And software is not that important. It's practical, maybe it saves money, but... So there's a variety and there's uniformity. But the most important thing, I think, if you think about the community is, and it's again a repetition, but it's organization. Because you can think about the community, but so you can get together and exchange information. But in the end, you want to make it productive. You want to get something out of it. And that means that, I was talking about scale and complexity. I think the organization struggles with that. If you have a community and you organize a community, there should be purpose and there should be continuity in it. It shouldn't be too big. It shouldn't be too, let's say, inhomogeneous. There should be clear focus in it. And also it should be somehow create a trust between the organization. But without the organization, without having an enthusiastic, dynamic community which is not encompassing everybody, because that's not possible, things won't happen in the end. I mean, good discussions, but it doesn't contribute effectively to decision making. I almost sound like a preacher, I'm sorry. And this is my last slide. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.